Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our session today. My name is Dr. Jerry Gule. I'm chatting to you from South Africa. I'm actually in Pretoria today, rainy Pretoria. Summer, we're in the middle of summer. I welcome you to this session. I represent the Africa Human Resources Confederation. I'm a member of the executive. I'm actually the treasurer of that organization. In my other role, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of People Management in South Africa. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and for us to be talking about this important subject, the importance of ethics in HR. In fact, last night I was on a session with other colleagues talking about the importance of ethics in general. We are in the beautiful and capable hands of Mrs. Lerato Mkidlana. She is a pro, she is an expert. She has been in this field for many years in the area of HR at different levels. She has functioned in different capacities. She runs her own business today in the area of consulting. And human capital, talent management, organizational, all those things are things that she has overseen leading big HR teams in different organizations. So while in the capable hands and beautiful hands of Lerato, I'm very, very privileged to have known her. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, without any, maybe let me just mention the fact that Lerato holds an MBA in addition to all her other qualifications. And she's an accredited assessor when it comes to skills assessment and assessing all manner of things that are related to learning and development. Is accredited by one of our sector education training authorities in South Africa. She's a specialist in leadership. That's one of the areas where she focuses on. But yeah, we're here talking about the importance of ethics. And Lerato, I'm saying we're in good hands because she's just been qualified as an ethics officer. And that's not an easy program to go through. The number of things that she has to do, but she has been passionate about this, and she decided that she was going to actually get herself qualified. So I hand you over now to the capable hands of our presenter, Lerato Mkidlana. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you, Dr. Gule. My name is Lerato, as you have already heard. I'm greeting you all from a very wet Midrand in Johannesburg. Today, our topic speaks to ethics. Now, most of the time, people want to say, if I'm doing legally correct, it means I'm ethical. Not necessarily. Ethics concerns ourselves about wrong and right. It is derived from the Greek philosophy of ethos. And again, it's for us then to say, as HR people within organizations, what is our role? How important is this in what we do every day? We know that HR is the custodian of culture in organizations, and therefore making sure that there's an ethical culture will most definitely be one of the key roles that HR has to play. Now, just to give us a structure of how we are going to do this afternoon, I want to say that I'm going to look at the different roles that HR play within the organization in terms of the different tasks that HR plays in the organization and how HR then, for me, HR is an enabling platform for ethics within the organization. Firstly, we need to make sure that an ethical culture exists. How do we then do that? One, we must make sure that the people that we bring into the organization are what can be called ethically correct in terms of organizational culture. So you don't want to be bringing into the organization somebody that you know just last week was in the newspapers for unethical behavior, because most certainly one bad potato spoils the whole bag. So for me, what we do then when we screen, when we bring people into the organization right at inception, we need to make sure that we bring people that are ethically correct for the organization and the culture that we want to then create for the organization. So our screening for potential employees at all levels is very important. Secondly, I then want to look at the policies that we put in place. Firstly, you find so many organizations have beautiful mission statements, beautiful value statements, value propositions, but when you go and just ask, not even one of the employees, you just ask one of the executives within the organization, what does your organizational values mean for you as a person? Firstly, they don't even remember what the organizational values are, you know? Then you find organizational values that are actually clashing, where we say we are go-getters as an organization, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we respect everybody. Clearly, that one tells you it's not going to happen. When you go get, sometimes you are going to, and which will then lead to ethical dilemmas. So at that very point, it is our role as HR to make sure that our value proposition and our values, firstly, are not conflicting, are actually ethically in line with our business strategy, but also make sure that we don't put employees in a precarious environment where, on the one hand, they want to obey one value, but the next value that they have to obey or actually make sure that they align with actually conflicts with us being an ethical culture. So for me, it then becomes imperative that we then look at our value system to then say, how is it that we actually carve our values in an organization so that it actually enables and makes sure that we have an ethical culture. Then we then look at, do we live our values? So I would then suggest that when we do policies and performance management, especially when we do performance management, because again, you can be the best performer, but if you are the best performer and you are unethical, the result eventually is going to be that you're going to bring the organization down. It's a mini victory that is not sustainable. So therefore, it's important for us to then look at how do we then make sure that we have star performers. Our performance management system is impeccable, but at the same time, it promotes an ethical culture within the organization. People need to then know that when you are performing at your peak, you cannot perform at the expense of making disregarding everything else. So it's important then that we live our values and we make sure that we are ethical in how we perform. So our performance management systems need to then have that element of ethics within it. So we then look at the policies that we put in place. When again, at some point, we then need to retrain the entire organization in terms of our value system and our ethical standpoint. Firstly, the people that come in would be the ones that we would want to deal with first, and making sure that our induction programs are then aligned and geared with our ethics codes or ethics policies and whatever there is there. So for me, that becomes an imperative to then make sure that we bring in and make sure that when people come into the organization, they have a very clear message about what the organizational ethical stance is. Then for the rest of the organization, again, it then becomes important to then retrain continuously. When we do training programs, leadership development and all of that, we then look at that, because remember, ethics can only happen in an organization when it's supported right from the top. In South Africa, we are fortunate enough that we have ethics within the public sector. We have social and ethics committees. Within the private sector, we have the board, which at some point when they look at in how to run the organization, because it is now according to King 4, a requirement that boards need to make sure that organizations are ethically run. So therefore, whether in the private or public space, you have that legal obligation now to be ethical and to make sure that the organization is run ethically. And we can see that we have serious problems these days where we have all sorts of corruption and all sorts of everything. So with that, that's when you then say, as HR, how do we then make sure that we make sure that we have that ethical culture. We then create an enabling environment where we create a platform where people can safely report unethical behavior without fear. And so it's different mechanisms that you would put in place then in terms of whether you have a specific, and that would be organization size dependent, and all to say that, do you then have a specific whistleblowing platform, or so you put in place a mechanism where employees are able to then safely report on ethical misconduct. Secondly, you then look at how all ethical risks are managed. So it's important then for, at that point, to then put all the ethics risks in the main organizational ethics risk register, so that it's monitored with all other risks within the organization. Because, for example, if you have your key stakeholders, people that do your business development, who are prone to bribes or prone to bribing to get contracts in, you know that, again, it's one of those short-lived victories, because eventually it will bring the organization into disrepute. You will find yourself in trouble. So you want to make sure that all of that is then taken care of. Then when it comes to employee relations, you also want to make sure that firstly, there are laws that govern employee relations, but you also want to make sure that people are then treated fairly, because in organizations, you do find that people follow rules, but in following rules, again, there's that dilemma that you actually have a moral issue that is actually not going correctly. So again, people would be saying to you, but according to the policy and according to the rules and regulations, I've done right. But the truth of it is, what is legally correct does not necessarily translate to being ethically correct. So we need to then make sure that what we do, even when legislation is applied, we then look at being ethically correct. Again, where people are, in your policies that you will then put in place, you'll also make sure that things like sexual harassment, things like bullying and all of that are then taken care of, and just to make sure that you actually are able to. So in you creating that ethical culture as HR, you then need to make sure that all the policies that are in place within the organization actually can maintain and sustain the ethical culture that you want to then look at. Our wellness programs as well also play a very important role, where when people have issues at work, whether they feel bullied, whether they feel intimidated, and all of that, we also need to then make sure that we have a program in place within our wellness space where people can then, it's one thing for people to report that I've been harassed, but if the organization also does not put in place some mechanism of people then being able to heal from such injuries, then it becomes a problem. So again, in making sure that we then have a holistic program within, and HR then plays that important role where people can then go through the wellness program and to then get their issues sorted out, because then even in that, you then promote a very healthy organizational culture. So as I have said before, HR is a big enabler in ethics. It's important. It's important for us as HR, because remember, the other thing as well is all records within the organizations are housed by us. So all employee records are within us. And how do we then treat organization employees with respect and confidentiality? Because in most cases, you find that employees will be telling you, if you want your stories to be known, or if you want anything about you to be known in this organization, go and tell HR, So again, it's that dilemma that we find ourselves as HR, where that people will come to you to actually voice all sorts of things. I normally say to people that as an HR executive in an organization, you are the complaints desk of personal lives. 90% of the things that you listen to are not even work related, but it is within your job to be empathetic to employees and to make them feel comfortable and safe. So those safe disclosures that people come to you with, you need to then be able to handle it in such a confidential and sensitive matter that if there's intervention that needs to take place within the organization, how you present it to the line manager or whoever is concerned is also then going to be a very important aspect, where the employee should not feel disrespected or feel that their confidentiality has been violated and stuff like that, or feel that truly that they've just been violated and left naked on a platform. So it's then how we then look at ourselves as HR people, being ethical, so again, ethics is not, if the organization is big enough to have an ethics office, it is important that HR works hand in hand with the ethics office, the same way, as I said, all ethics risks that are identified go into the internal audit, into the risk register. So again, that process of working with risk, with all of that, then becomes a holistic one. Because again, if we don't measure, because again, from a monitoring point, your exit interviews should actually give you an indication of how you are faring as an organization in terms of your ethical culture. If at any given point you see that there's a pillage of people in a particular department, and all of them either refuse to do, because in most cases people fear even when they're leaving, to speak up. So again, you then look at, did you create an ethical, does your culture actually create a platform where people can freely talk about ethics, where people can freely report unethical behavior, or where they, when they have personal dilemmas, because sometimes people then say, oh, I was at a client has invited me for lunch. If you didn't put in place a policy or some mechanism that will allow an employee to then make an ethically correct decision, whether what is the tone and the form of that lunch. Your gift policies must be very clear. What can and cannot be accepted? Are you going to allow your employees to go and play golf with your suppliers or with your clients? So all of those things then become very imperative and very important in how you actually then package your policies and the culture that you want within the organization. I think at this point, I want to make this a very interactive session. I want us to then go into the question answer session so that people can ask.
Yes, thank you so much, Lerato. That was great. That was great. I think I'm going to ask the first question.
Okay.
And I'll ask maybe 2 or 3 questions. So the first, your observations are all spot on, and in terms of how does this whole thing of an ethical conduct in an organization come about? You have already stated that it's something that has to be lived, and it is driven from the top. If the people that, so that's the one point to make, that the leadership, the people in the organization actually create that culture. And of course, HR enables it to happen. So Mike, I have 2 questions on that one. How important are words? What you said in creating an ethical culture, an ethical conduct in an organization, how important is the words that we speak? Are they important or are they not important? That's the one question. The second question is this notion that a lot of people don't trust their HR departments, their HR, they as an HR person, I sometimes feel that, but how can you be saying that? So the question really is, how can we build our credibility so that we are fully trusted as HR officers? Those 2 questions for now, then we'll take questions from the audience. You can raise your
Okay.
hand, put the question I don't know that they can put the question on the chat or not, but maybe I won't be able to see their questions. I don't know. Anyway, those two questions, what do you say?
Okay, firstly, Prajeri, it's important about how you talk within the organization, because yes, you may want to put, as I was saying, if your talk does not go with your value system, then there's a problem, you know. So how you talk and how you address employees, even if you have a code of conduct or an ethical code within the organization, if the way you speak is unethical, you know, the way you behave towards employees is unethical, it actually just nullifies everything that you are trying to create. So firstly, in creating your ethical culture, it's important then to do an ethics risk and opportunities assessment. And that is not a way of, you know, it's not a way of catching out unethical people within the organization, but it's a way of you determining what exactly is the appetite of ethics within the ethical culture within the organization, and where we are at that time. So it is important to make sure, and hence I was saying, in our policies, you know, we could be legally correct, but there could be an ethical clash. So it's important then to make sure that we review how we speak, we review our policies to then make sure that they actually do speak to that ethical culture that we want to create. Now, you are also saying, you also asked the second question, that how do we then create credibility as HR within organizations? We know that, you know, as organizations evolve and as times evolve, it then becomes imperative, you know, as I say, that within the HR space, where if somebody comes and, you know, and sometimes it's not even somebody coming, because you receive, if somebody's off sick, you are the person that's going to receive the medical certificate. It cannot be that that medical certificate will be lying at a printing machine at some point, because somebody was making a copy in the HR department and forgot to go and collect it. So 3 other people that were not supposed to see it have seen it. So that's part of how the leaks happen. You know, sometimes it's just pure negligence that we do as HR professionals. Sometimes, again, as I was saying, that when you select people to come into the organization, your induction and your selection process needs to speak to your to the culture that you want to create ethically, so that you make sure you bring in the correct people. So right from the onset, where you then start with bringing people in, you then need to make sure that you're bringing people that are going to be ethically sound for the organization. Because as I said, it's one potato that can make the whole bag rotten.
Yeah, the whole bag would stink just because there's one stinking potato. And HR, we as professionals, we are and in fact, sometimes we have to take the flak, because I was actually asking some colleagues saying, but you know, that organization is known as such a corrupt organization. What happened here? Who brought all the people here? We did. We as HR. Okay, there's some great questions here. And the first question from McDonald says, okay, let me just see if I can pick it up again. He says, how does one start an HR ethics culture or policy for a new organization? I think this is a beautiful question. And I think the opportunity, if it's new, I mean, it's like a clean slate. Loretta, what do you say to that?
Definitely, Brajeri, if it's a new organization, it's definitely a clean slate, because right from the onset, as the person that is starting the organization, or the people that are involved in starting the organization, as I said, ethics only live in an organization when it's supported right from the top. So if you, the people that are starting the organization, can start right there to say, this is the culture, this is how we define ourselves. So your values right from the beginning will then be saying, this is what we want to see: integrity, honesty. And please don't just state integrity and honesty and then say, people will decide what integrity and honesty mean to themselves. You actually need to define what it means for your specific organization, because from there, that's when you then look at how then best do you then come up with an ethics code. In most cases, you find that people do a cut and paste. So they just look on the internet, who has a code, you know, and but you forget that that code is for that specific organization. And I normally advise people that cut and paste doesn't normally work, you know. So you need to then say, what kind of an organization do you want to find yourself to be? You can benchmark yourself, even if you are a startup, you can benchmark yourself against people that you are going to be competing with, people that, you know, that are going to be your stakeholders, you know, because that is what's going to be important. If you know that you are in an industry that is prone to corruption, you then need to, as you start, you then need to almost make yourself to corruption proof your organization.
Thank you. Okay, here is another great question from Lindy. Lindy says, afternoon to you. Thank you for the interesting topic and knowledgeable speaker. I am interested to know, how does one remove the subjectivity around ethics in the organization or in the leadership? I hope that question is clear to you, Lerato.
Yes. Okay. As I say, again, we're dealing here with an issue of right and wrong, you know, and right and wrong, you know, it's known that you know, unfortunately, you will always find yourself in an ethical dilemma, because what is right and wrong is also subject to where you are. You know, for example, you find that, I'll give you an example where you have a law that says don't employ people that are underage, but you then find countries where only children can work. You know, so what do you then do? Do you employ children, or do you enable the children? And you know, because there's nobody in the organization, in their families that can work. So again, it's those dilemmas that you will always find yourself with, where you then need to make sure that there's a difference between wrong and right. But that starts right from the value system of the organization. Because if your values are ambiguous and they're conflicting, that's when you are going to find most subjectivity, where people think, I will define what is wrong or what is right. If as an organization, you are going to say, for us, we have zero tolerance for bribes, not tolerance for, we have zero tolerance for bribes if it's done by another employee, but if it's done by the employee, by the CEO, it's fine. It must be zero tolerance for bribes. So that removes, so when you have very clear specific policies and monitoring, it then removes the subjectivity out of it. Because as I say, don't say we don't tolerate this, but if it's done, you know, no, all animals must be equal as an animal, you know, and no others must be more equal than others. All must be equal. So it must be running right from the top to the last person.
Yeah. Great. I think I can add to that, Lindy, if you're still listening, is my sense is one of the things that helps with taking out subjectivity and, you know, which obviously is going to lead to unethical behavior again. So to take subjectivity, one of the things that we need to do is to be transparent. So I would hold the leaders accountable and be transparent. An example I can give, I work in an escort team. Our key value was that we are in the same boat, meaning we cannot be surprising each other in the management team. You know, you just come to criticize instead of being constructive. So we would monitor. So one of the team members would be actually a monitor. While you participate in the meeting, we are also monitoring how people are behaving. At the end of just before the meeting ends, you give feedback. Transparency helps, because then you are going to call conduct that is not clear or that is not acceptable. You're going to call it out and say, when that happened, the meeting went wrong, or the feelings of that, the energy that was generated was incorrect. So we need to correct it like this. I think there is a couple more questions and we have run out of time. So in the minutes that we have, I think I can ask these few questions here. There's a question from Mika. How can HR assist in an organization to stop the deviation of organizations' good employees in retail stores? Oh, Mika, we are starting a big war here. Okay, how can HR assist to stop trouble or unethical conduct, particularly within the retail sector? I think that's generally the question there.
As I have said before, Dr. Gule, it's that our policies and our policies and procedures need to be very clear and unambiguous, because as I said, they must be applicable to everybody, right from the top to, because where you have rules that are applicable to some people and not to others, that's when you open the door for all sorts of misdemeanors ethically. So you just then need to make sure that everything is standard. You have already spoken about transparency, and so all the rules need to be applicable to everybody. That's the first one, irrespective of the department, because even if we are to tweak it for a specific, whether it's a retail or what, if we, as I said, if we say late coming is not acceptable, late coming must not be acceptable for some people and not for some people. It must not be acceptable.
Yeah. Okay. We've run out of time. I'll ask this question from Anonymous, and that will be the last question, and we will close. So the question from Anonymous is, I find one of my employees or staff acting unethically. How do we address and handle this situation? What are the acceptable disciplinary actions for unethical conduct? You have 30 seconds to answer this one.
Okay. As I have said, the policies we put in place need to be very clear. And what is unethical conduct? Were they offering a bribe to a supplier or to a client? Where did they sexually harass somebody within the organization? So again, your HR policies need to support your ethical culture or your ethical code in making sure that you ensure. So again, some of those things will then be clearly outlined within your disciplinary code of conduct. So again, don't shy away in your disciplinary code to then just look at operational issues. You also need to make sure that all these soft issues as well are covered.
Yeah, there's a brilliant question here. I'm now breaking my own rules, but it's about toxicity in an organization. How do you bring a culture of ethics in a toxic environment? And how does one try to be not to be eaten by those that practice unethical conduct to gain contracts? I would say, Lerato, the first thing to do, the first problem is to deal with the toxicity. Okay, and
Yes.
how do you deal with toxicity? Okay, this is the thing that we do in organizations, and it amazes me. We all are adults. We go to work, we have minds, we can think, we can take care. We're leaders in the community. When we get to the organization, for some reason we become stupid. We do things that are so silly that you say, but why are you doing that? You're an adult. So anyway, answer the question on toxicity. What would you do? Where do you start?
Okay.
Ethics or to deal with the toxicity?
Well, firstly, you need to find the source of the toxicity, because the toxicity could actually be that it is your culture. So again, remember, all of those things could be identified firstly in a pure organizational culture survey, where then you can also identify, because remember, culture surveys are done anonymously, so you'll actually be able to pinpoint exactly which department or where the source of the toxicity is, and then you deal with it decisively. Because in most cases, because we sugarcoat things and we let things slide and say, because it's our star performer, you can't do this. As I said, make sure that you are consistent in applying your rules. Make sure that you deal with everybody on an equal footing. You are transparent when doing that. And in that way, firstly, because then that also then dissipates the toxicity, and people then become more trusting within the organization, because toxicity also then talks to trust issues within the organization, because when people start then having a leader that is not supposed to be leading them within the organization, then something is wrong. So you need to go back and say, where does this emanate from? And again, if management is toxic, again, it's that point where in most cases, we always look and want to discipline lower employees. Don't be afraid as an organization to fire a CEO or a financial director or even an HR director or whoever, one of the executives, if they are not helping the organization to achieve that ethical culture. So it needs to start there, so that the whole organization can then see that this is real and it's happening.
Yes. Okay, this was great. I think I'll leave it to my colleagues. Maybe we need to have a part two. We haven't finished. I mean, this is a wealth of experience that we're getting and knowledge that we're getting from Lerato. Lerato, thank you so much. To our participants, thank you so much. Time is up. We have no more time to continue, but I appreciate your being here today. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye to all of you. Keep well and stay ethical.
Yes. Bye-bye.